Chapter 3 Naruto, Desert Flower. Sunagakure no Sato. Temari was pulling Naruto through the streets, and many more of the heads of the villagers were turning, as they were surprised to see the princess of Suna pulling a blonde shinobi whom none of them recognized, but saw the Suna headband, and were confused. Many girls were looking at Naruto and blushing, and then whispering amongst themselves, while the guys were looking on in jealousy. Naruto was nervous since it did remind him of the stairs back in Konoha, but he reminded himself that this wasn't his birth village now. They walked towards the clan grounds of the village, and then to a really large estate. Temari took Naruto in the house as he marveled at the great house, and was amazed that it was only for 3 people. "All right Naruto, this is my house and now yours for the time being. Let me show you around, all right?" she said, and he nodded, following her around as she showed him a large living room, and then took him into the large dining room that was attached to the kitchen. She then took him to the first floor, and as they climbed up the stairs they came to a hallway as Naruto saw many rooms down the hall, and Temari spoke up, pulling him into a room with a king-sized bed, a big closet, a dressing table with a huge shelf besides it, and an attached bathroom. He was transfixed that he was going to live here. It was as big as his old apartment in the Leaf, he mused. "And Naruto, this is your room. The room besides you is Kankuro's, and the one in front of his is Gaara's, while mine is at the end of the hallway to the left." She chirped happily, and he nodded with a small smile as he and Temari started walking down towards the living room as Naruto sat down on the armchair, while Temari plopped down face first on the cushion over the couch. "Man, I wish we could have something to eat just now. The restaurant takes 2 hours to deliver, and I hate to eat there with all the people staring at me all the time," she murmured in the pillow as Naruto smiled a little. "Then maybe I could make you something," he asked softly, and she looked at him surprised with a raised eyebrow. "You could cook?" she asked in a surprised voice, and he nodded, getting up and walked into the kitchen as Temari sat on the stool besides the counter as Naruto started to pull out a pan, knife and the ingredients that were available. She watched surprised as he washed his hands, and then the vegetables, and then started cutting them like a professional. He tossed the piece of steak that he found in the fridge into the frying pan as he started to make a sauce to go over it in the other. As soon as the aroma began to spread, Temari's stomach growled, and Naruto turned to her and smiled as she blushed in embarrassment. "Wow, you really know how to cook. I can tell from just the smell. The only one that could cook amongst us is Kankuro, and that too is just average," she said as she remembered the few times he cooked, and it didn't leave a good taste to remember ever, so she always preferred to order food home. "Here you go," he said, keeping the plate in front of her as he sat in front of her, pulling a stool himself, and sat down in front of her. Temari looked at her plate, and the smell was just amazing as she took a fork and cut a piece as she put it in her mouth, and her eyes shot open as her mouth exploded with flavors. She immediately dug in for some more, smiling as Naruto saw her, and smiled a bit that she liked it, and ate slowly himself. Ayam had taught him how to cook, though he always ate at the stand as it gave him company, and he didn't like always eating alone. As Temari finished and cleaned her plate, she sighed in relief as she turned to Naruto with a smile. "You're a great cook, Naruto. This beats the hell out of that restaurant's food any day," she said happily, and he smiled as he picked up the plates and went to wash them as Temari leaned against the counter besides him. "I'm glad you like it. I can make you dinner every night if you'd like it. It's the least I could do," he said, and she beamed. Eating food like that every day was heaven. "That would be great, Naruto. Now I don't have to eat Kankuro's bland dishes anymore," she said, scrunching up her nose, and Naruto laughed a little at her expression, and she smiled. His laugh was soft, but at least he was coming out a little. Naruto himself felt good. It had been a long time since he had laughed. "You should laugh and smile more, Naruto. It suits you better," she said softly, and he smiled a bit. "Yeah, maybe I might have some things to be happy about here," he whispered, and she smiled and nodded. Both went into their rooms as they changed for the night and went to bed. Midnight. Temari was trying to sleep and was hugging her bear, but was missing the warmth of Naruto as she wrapped her legs around the bear, hugging it tightly to her chest as she scrunched her eyes, but the sleep won't come to her eyes. She was sleeping in just her t-shirt and her white cotton panties. She didn't like to be in much clothes, but she was annoyed that she couldn't sleep now. She turned around a couple of times in her bed, but the sleep just won't come. She got up and decided to get some water. As she passed by Naruto's room, she heard sniffing, and she stopped dead in her tracks. She opened the room of his door with a click and went in. As she came close to Naruto's bed to see him trembling and crying in his sleep, as she sat down beside him and put her hand on his forehead and ran her fingers through his hair as his trembling calmed down a little. "SHH Naruto, it's all right. Sleep," she whispered softly as she laid down beside him, when he suddenly wrapped his arms around her and pulled her close to him. She let out a small eep and was blushing because of the clothes both were wearing. He was in his boxers and a t-shirt, and she too wasn't faring well. But she loved the warmth that he emitted and wrapped her arms around his waist slowly and softly and put her face in the crook of his neck as she closed her eyes, and Naruto calmed down and fell into a deep slumber. She too fell asleep from his slight breathing with a small smile. Morning. Temari woke up from a deep sleep that took all of her stress of the constant missions she had been on away. She felt 2 arms wrapped around her waist and something hard, but still warm on her back, and then she felt the face of Naruto buried in the back of her neck and blushed as memories of last night came back, and she tried to scoot out of his grip to avoid the embarrassing position Naruto would wake up in, but he pulled her closer and buried his face in the back of neck a bit more as her blush intensified. She decided to sleep a bit more and closed her eyes and got comfortable and prepared for the embarrassment to come. Downstairs, an exhausted Gaara and Kankuro came in and sat down on the couch. "Man, that mission was tiring. I hate border security," whined Kankuro, and Gaara nodded. He didn't have the same problem as Kankuro since he didn't sleep, only meditated, but last night he had to do some official paperwork that to be sent in the morning, and he too was exhausted. "Hey, where's Temari? She's usually up and about now," asked Kankuro, and Gaara nodded himself, wondering the same thing. "Yes, she must be sleeping in," he said monotonously, and Kankuro got up and walked towards the stairs. "All right, I'll wake her up, make us some breakfast, and then sleep," he said, and Gaara nodded. He followed him as he too had to get something in his room. Kankuro walked to Temari's room and knocked as he got no answer. He knocked again a couple of times and called her but got no answer. Gaara walked out of his room and saw him standing on her door. "What's wrong?" he asked stoically, and Kankuro turned around. "Temari isn't answering the door, should we?" Go in," he asked nervously, and Gaara went in deep thought for a moment. Temari didn't like anyone coming into her room, especially in the morning, and would chase them to death. But he had his sand and was safe. "But Kankuro—" "Yes, we should," he said, and Kankuro nodded and opened the door as both peeked in to see the room empty and grew confused. Then an idea came to Gaara's mind. Naruto was living here too. He must be in the guest room and know where she was since he was the last one to meet her. "Kankuro, I have an idea," he said, and walked towards the guest room with Kankuro in tow, who was confused but shrugged and followed as Gaara opened and entered the room, and Kankuro behind him, and stopped dead in their tracks as they saw Temari, but were shocked as they saw her snuggled with Naruto. Kankuro's jaw dropped to the ground and started muttering incoherent words, pointing his index finger at the blondes in bed as Gaara's eyes too were wide for a few moments. Temari was sleeping with her back against his chest as he had pulled her closer, with his arms wrapped around her waist and his face buried in her flowing blonde hair. Temari, hearing Kankuro's babbling, fluttered her eyes open and saw her brothers standing there and expressions of disbelief on their faces, and she blushed a faint pink blush with the position she was in. She turned around in his arms and put her hand on his cheek, tapping it lightly. "Naruto, wake up," she whispered softly, and he snuggled into her neck. She blushed a deep crimson and was glad her face wasn't visible to her brothers. Smells nice," he muttered, and went back to sleep. Now Kankuro was pale as a sheet as he knew Temari was going to kill him and prayed for the blonde's afterlife to be good. Gaara too was worried for his friend as he knew how Temari reacted to someone who got in with her in the same room, let alone the same bed, even if by accident. He had to save Kankuro the last time he tried to wake her up, and was beaten to near death as Temari assumed he was a pervert, without even giving him a chance to explain, and had gotten the beating of his life. "Naruto, wake up please," she whispered softly again as Naruto's eyes fluttered open, and he gazed into Temari's beautiful teal-green eyes, and saw that she was a bit red in the face. "Temari, what are you doing here? And why are you so red? Are you sick?" he asked sleepily, and put his forehead against hers to check her temperature, and saw that she was a bit hot. All the blood in Temari's body rushed to her face as she gazed into his cerulean orbs that were looking at her with concern. "Temari, you should stay in bed today, I'll make you something to eat. You look a bit sick," he said in concern, and Temari saw his innocence, and all doubts in her mind vanished about him trying something with her. "What are you doing here anyways, Temari?" he asked, and she smiled though still had a faint pink blush on her face. "I walked past your room last night, and you were trembling and crying in sleep from a nightmare. So I rubbed your head to calm you down, but you pulled me close in your sleep," she whispered, and he nodded. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and she shook her head. "It's a light, you were in your sleep and I came into your room, so it's all right," she whispered, and he nodded, letting her loose as both sat up. "I'll go make some breakfast, you get fresh all right," he said, and she nodded as he stood up and saw Gaara and Kankuro standing there with stupefied looks on their faces. He smiled a bit as he walked past them. "Morning, Gaara, Kankuro," he said, walking past, but got no answer and thought they were a bit sleepy and walked down the stairs. Temari saw their faces, and after a few moments Gaara broke out of his stupor. "I approve," he said monotonously, pulling Kankuro out by the collar of his cat suit as Temari's blush returned full force at the insinuation as Gaara closed the door, and she stood up and went to her room to get some shorts as she too headed down after getting her face washed. She walked down the stairs as again a wonderful aroma hit her nose, and she walked into the kitchen and saw Gaara, who was staring at Naruto, while Kankuro was drooling from the smell, and she looked at him in disgust. "Close your mouth, Kankuro, I will be getting the first plate anyways," she said as Kankuro glared at her. "And who said that?" he retorted, and Temari smiled a little too sweetly at him. "I did." "You have a problem with that?" she asked sweetly, and he gulped and shook his head as she sat down with a smile. It was great to not eat Kankuro's disgusting miso soup and rice in the morning, she thought, as Naruto kept 2 plates with fried eggs, caramelized bacon, toasts and milk as she snatched one plate, while Kankuro went for the other, but San took it before he could get his hands on it. "Hey, that's not fair," he yelled indignantly, pointing a finger at Gaara, who ignored his rant and took a bite as he spoke. "We are shinobi. Nothing we do is fair," he said stoically while Kankuro fumed. He turned around feeling a tap on his shoulder as he saw Naruto handing him a plate, and he took it with a smile. Temari dug into her plate and her tongue was in heaven. It had been a last great couple of meals, she had to admit, and he was a damn good cook. "Naruto, you are a great cook, and this is 1,000 times better than that stuff Kankuro cooks and calls food," she said, eating happily as Naruto sat in front of her with a smile and ate. "Indeed," said Gaara and kept eating. "Hey," yelled Kankuro as Temari giggled at their antics and saw Naruto eating his food slowly, not interested in their conversation, and smiled sadly as she too concentrated on eating. Kankuro had been told about Naruto by Gaara when he went to report his mission, so he didn't want to probe the troubled blonde too much and decided to stay quiet. Naruto finished his breakfast at the same time as Temari as he took her plate. She tried to protest, but he took it anyways and went to the sink to clean them up. Temari followed him to the kitchen as Gaara and Kankuro were left alone. "She's different around him," suddenly Kankuro said, and Gaara nodded. "She is. And I approve if they get close. Naruto is better than any of the people in the village after Temari," and I trust him with her, and I know Temari won't do anything to break his heart or betray him. She is too strong-willed for that. They are good with each other, and I would like it if they got together," he said, and Kankuro was surprised. Gaara was protective of Temari, and had scared many guys who tried to approach her due to her status away, and if he approved of Naruto then that was good since he himself trusted the blonde. And from what he saw in the morning there was a chance they could get together, he mused. He wanted to tease Temari about it, but knew better than to aggravate her and be at the receiving end of her battle fan. In the kitchen, Naruto was going through the dishes that were used for cooking, and the ones he and Temari used as Temari was drying them off, and she decided to ask him something to start up a conversation. "So Naruto, what have you planned for the day?" she asked curiously, and he thought for a moment and replied. "I'll start my training today. Get my body up to speed and work on my taijutsu. Then meet up with Gaara in the afternoon for my registration, and getting whatever rank I'm given," he said, and she nodded, happy that he was going to get back in shape. She knew the kind of a ninja he could be, and how he lashed back to protect someone when backed up into a corner, as she had witnessed it firsthand, and was glad he was a Suna shinobi now. "If you want any help or a sparring partner, I'll help you, all right," she said, and he nodded gratefully. "Thank you, but for now I'll have to train myself back to the way I was and then surpass the strength I had. I had many weaknesses in the past that I have had a lot of time alone to think about from the experiences of my previous battles. I'll work up those skills too and not rely on the Kyuubi's chakra any longer," he said softly, but with a bit of determination in his voice, and Temari smiled at seeing the spark reignite within him. "All right, tell me when you are ready. I'm looking forward to that spar," she said, grinning, and he smiled a bit and nodded as he finished and washed his hands as he went to his room to get ready. He showered and changed into the clothes that Temari bought for him yesterday, and unsealed the wooden box his parents had left him, and picked up the lid as he gazed at the scrolls in it. He had just read some of the books that were sealed in a scroll by his mother from the Uzumaki clan, but he didn't ever look into all the scrolls his father left him, or the scrolls on the adamantine chains and kenjutsu that his mother left him, since he believed his days as a shinobi were over. But now was the time to open them, he mused as he picked up the scroll on his father's taijutsu style, the hummingbird style, used with the speed and agility with quick blows that all the Namikaze clan members were naturally entwined to. He always wondered how he was so quick that he could outrun the Konoha Anbu after his pranks when the old man sent them to catch him, but he used to run them to the ground for hours before the old man himself or Irika-sensei would catch him. His heart ached as he thought of his deceased grandfather, and how much he fought for him against the council for him. The only one to care when he was a child if he lived or not, and he knew that the monthly stipend that he got after he was kicked out from the orphanage was from his personal accounts, since the council would never approve a monthly stipend for him. He walked into a training field at the estate, and found a stump nearby to practice his katas on as he read the exercises and stretches written on the scroll, and started going through them. He read through the basic katas and started going through them for a couple of hours, when he was finally convinced he had done enough exercises till noon, and went through the katas until lunchtime. Kazukage Tower. Council Chambers. The council structure of Suna was very different from that of the council that Konoha had. Where Konoha had a shinobi council, a civilian council, and an advisory of the elder council of the Hokage, Suna used a council comprised of 10 people, all high-ranking shinobis of the village, or war veterans with plenty of experience and wisdom. Gaara came in through the door as the Anbu guarding him closed the door and vanished into the walls. Gaara sat at his seat on the round table as everyone started wondering why he had called an urgent meeting. Gaara, seeing their confusion, decided to explain. "As all of you must be wondering why I have called you here, I'll get straight to the point," he said, and everyone nodded. They knew he liked to talk direct to the point, and they respected that aspect of his not beating around the bush. "You all must be aware who Naruto Uzumaki is, I presume?" he asked, and they all nodded, knowing the guy who defeated Gaara in the Sand Sound invasion on the Leaf, and their most promising genin, as their reports had said after the invasion. Naruto Uzumaki was banished from Konoha 6 months ago, and the council there ordered all of its allies that if he stepped foot in their territory, he was bound for execution. He said as the council became deathly silent until Baki spoke up. Why would they do that? He was one of their promising and loyal genin if what we saw in the Chunin exams was any indication. What did he do? He asked and Gaara nodded agreeing with his assessment. He captured Sasuke Uchiha when he turned on the village to leave for Orochimaru, but the battle caused the Uchiha many injuries for which the council decided to take out its hate on him being the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails by banishing him. All of his friends and teachers turned on him reading the false report of the Uchiha, and the presence of the Biju's chakra only solidified their false assumptions. He spoke calmly and whispers broke out. Those fools, we should look for the boy. He could become a shinobi of the Sand Village, and the whole village respects him already, and he even spared you Kazekage-sama during the invasion, and you respect him as a brother as I've heard. Another councilman said and Gaara smirked, looks like it won't be as hard as he had presumed. He could be a strong shinobi for our village, and his loyalty is unquestioned according to reports, and we have no such orders from the Leaf Village, and neither have we signed any strong mutual treaty with the village yet, due to their unreasonable demands. Chiyo said and Gaara nodded and smiled as all the councilmen were curious why he was smiling. There is no need for us to find him, he said crossing his fingers in front of his mouth and closing his eyes as the whole council protested and shouted, but he cut them off. Because he is already in the village, he said as the whole room turned deathly silent and curious looks were sent at the Kazekage. Temari found him in a small village near the Sand Village and convinced him to come here. I've already assigned him in the roster and given him his headband, and the only thing left to do is to assign him a suitable rank for which I am here for your recommendations, he said stoically, and they all murmured amongst themselves before Ebizo spoke up. After his performance in the exams and in the invasion, I say Chunin for now is a suitable rank if I may suggest Kazekage-sama, he said, and the whole council agreed and Gaara too nodded with a smile. Then Naruto Uzumaki is hereby granted the rank of Chunin, he said, and they all nodded with a smile. I have decided to put him on the reserved list for the time being as was his request to me, he said, and they were confused and waited to hear his reasons. He hasn't used chakra and hasn't trained in the past 6 months to hide himself completely from the enemies that would have chased after him, and has lost his edge. He has requested for an indefinite training time, until he finds himself back to his strength for training. And I agree with him. Does the council agree? He asked, and they all nodded. It made sense, and he would only get stronger if he trained nicely. Then the council is dismissed, he said, and they all left with smiles on their faces at the new addition in their shinobi forces. Gaara was glad they saw reason, and him being a Jinchuriki that had a completely stable seal only warranted the council to trust and respect him more. And add to that the fact that he was completely free, he was waiting to be taken in. He was only sad that he didn't find him earlier. Kazekage Tower, Kazekage Office. Gaara was going through the documents and mission scrolls when a knock was heard, and he knew who it was. He had been waiting for his friend. Come in, he said, and in walked the mop of sun-kissed blonde hair, and his eyes went wide. He had to say that Temari wasn't wrong when she said he looked great in his shinobi outfit. He too had to admit he looked like a serious shinobi in those clothes, and the scratches he had on his skin and the little dust on his clothes was clear indication that he had been training hard, and his posture was now a bit straighter than yesterday. He noticed and motioned for him to take a seat, knowing he would be tired a bit. Naruto, the council has made its decision and has agreed to accept you as a shinobi of the Sand Village by unanimous voting in your favor and come to a decision on your rank. After seeing your performance at the exams and in the invasion, you are hereby promoted to the rank of Chunin, he said, handing him a light beige-colored vest that he took with a small smile, and his eyes watered. He was nervous that the council might not accept him, but now all his doubts had been blown away. He wiped his eyes and thanked him, and Gaara nodded, taking out a form. Naruto, here is your registration form. You must know what all you need to fill. Name, clan status, rank, parents, and a signature to pledge your allegiance to Tsunegakure no Sato. There's no need for a photograph, I have one already that was taken when you were training, so you won't have to waste time with it. He said, and he nodded, taking it, and started filling out all the details truthfully. He handed it back to Gaara, whose eyes widened as he dropped the paper from shock, and pulled out an old bingo book, and opened up 2 pages, and looked at him, then back at the book, and then again at him and sighed. I can't believe no one your village has noticed it until now in all these years. I myself feel stupid for not noticing it. Do you wish to tell the village? He asked, and Naruto shook his head with a small smile, glad he didn't doubt his claim. No, I'm not ready to defend myself if someone comes after me. Maybe when I'm a bit stronger. I don't care for fame either. I just want to take up my father's name, he said, and Gaara smiled sadly. You could have hidden it from me until you were ready. Why did you tell me then? He asked, and Naruto smiled a small smile. You are my Kage now. I am loyal to the village, but first and the foremost to you, I won't lie to you. He said, and Gaara smiled. His loyalty to the village was unquestionable, and this was the proof. Very well, this registration form will be misplaced for the time being until you are ready to reveal it. I am glad you trust me with this, and one more thing, your request to be put on the reserved roster has been approved. You'll be reinstated when I feel you're ready, or you request yourself. Here is your monthly stipend, you'll get it from me personally until you are back on missions. He said, calmly handing him the envelope, and Naruto took it gratefully. Gaara didn't want to tell him it was from him, and not from the village, as he didn't want him to waste his time on D-ranks for money, and he had plenty from the Sabaka fortune. Arigato, Gaara. He said, and Gaara nodded as he turned to leave, and Gaara spoke up. Naruto, what do you think of Temari? He asked as Naruto stopped holding the knob to the door as he turned his head to show his one visible eye deadly serious. He didn't understand why he asked that, but he would answer him nonetheless. My life belongs to her, I would have died had she not pulled me out of my dark time. She is probably the only one I keep above this village and you. He said, and Gaara nodded as he opened the door and left. A smirk found its way on Gaara's lips as he started going through the documents again. Night time. Naruto was sitting on the roof of the Sabaku estate gazing at the stars and the moon, as had become his habit over the last 6 months of sleeping alone in the alleys on the streets. He felt comfort in the silence and the twinkling of stars, and the cool breeze blowing against his face as he sensed someone behind him, but knew who it was as a small smile graced his lips. Hey. Temari softly said, sitting beside him in her usual white battle kimono, with a fishnet wrapping on her right thigh and left calf, and her headband on her neck as she brought her knees to her chest and wrapped her arms around them. Hey. He said softly, and both sat in comfortable silence gazing at the sky as Temari spoke up. I heard you were made Chunin, congratulations. She whispered, and he nodded gratefully with a small smile. Arigato, I owe you a lot, Temari. I owe you my life. He whispered, staring at the sky, and a small smile graced her features as Naruto turned his head towards her, his eyes glazed with tears, and she gasped as he continued. I finally belong somewhere. People don't hate me here, they don't throw me out of shops, they don't wish death on me, but I'm a part of the village here. Today I felt like I had someplace to belong and maybe a chance for acceptance. For the first time in my life I was happy. He said through sobs breaking down a bit as Temari brought him close to her and hugged him. She was happy that he had some of his shine return to his eyes. How much he craved for just being accepted, she thought, cursing the Leaf Village inwardly and running her fingers through his golden locks. Everyone will respect you here, and I have always accepted you, Naruto, and I always will. She whispered, and he nodded as she wiped away her tears as the smell of something cooking reached their noses, and Temari scrunched up her face in disgust. That idiot Kankuro is making something again, he'll eat it alone. I swear I'll die before I have another bowl of his disgusting miso soup again. She said, and Naruto laughed as she leaned her head on his shoulder and scooted closer to avoid the breeze as Naruto wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her closer to him as a rosy pink blush adorned her cheeks, and she smiled and melted in him, taking in his warmth that blocked the cold breeze. Don't worry, I'll make you something after Kankuro, and Gara are done finishing their dinner all right? He said softly, and she smiled and nodded on his shoulder. Thank you, I love it when you cook, you know, she whispered, and he put his head on hers, both gazing at the stars, smiling. I know, he whispered back. Both of them entered an hour after Gara and Kankuro had finished with their dinner, and Naruto cooked her up some curry and rice, and to her surprise a caramel pudding that she devoured much to his amusement, and he gave her his portion too, seeing her happy face as she ate it and sighed contently. Naruto started going back to his room when he saw Temari stop behind him fidgeting, and he was confused as she was looking down fiddling with her kimono. He put a hand on her cheek and brought her face up to meet his eyes as he looked at her, concerned. What was wrong? What's wrong, Temari? He asked, and she looked in his eyes, looking at her in concern, and had a faint blush on her face as she decided to make her embarrassing request. I kinda wanted to ask you if we could share the same bed. I like it when someone holds me. I haven't had anyone since my mother, and have always slept alone. So I was thinking if you wouldn't mind. She stopped as Naruto chuckled softly, and she looked at him hurt, and averted her eyes, thinking he was making fun of her as a tear rolled down her eye. She had told him her problem and showed him her vulnerable side, and now she felt stupid. Temari, look at me, he whispered softly, and she didn't meet his eyes as he put his other hand on her cheek, forcing her to look at him as he gave her a small smile. You didn't even have to ask, he said softly, and her eyes widened as she hugged him tightly, and he hugged her back, chuckling softly as she punched his chest, muttering baka, and smiled, burying her face in his chest. Go on and get changed into something comfortable, all right? He whispered, and she nodded and went to her room to get changed into her t-shirt and some skin-tight shorts that she wore in the nights. Last night had been embarrassing enough to sleep with him in her panties, and she was at least going to wear something comfortable and respectable tonight, as she opened the door and blushed seeing him in his boxers and t-shirts. Naruto, are you going to wear that to sleep? She asked, and he looked at himself confused. Is something wrong with it? He asked innocently, honestly not understanding what the problem was. And no, it's nothing, she said, blushing a faint pink blush, and he shrugged as both got into the bed, and she laid her head on his chest, wrapping her arms around his waist as he pulled her closer and took in the scent of her hair. She smelled like desert lilies, he mused, and both cuddled up as Temari sighed in satisfaction. Naruto was glad too, since the last 2 nights he had slept with her there were no nightmares to haunt him, and he had slept peacefully as both of their eyes drooped heavily and Temari yawned cutely. Good night, Naruto, she whispered softly. Good night, Temari, he whispered back, and both fell into a deep slumber, the peaceful silence of the night and the cool breeze coming through the window claiming them as both slept, enjoying each other's warmth.
Alright, guys, so that's gonna be part 3 of What If Naruto was abandoned by the leaf and taken into the sand village. Um, please tell me what you thought of the What If Naruto was the Red Flash in the comments, and if you want to see more, if you feel like it, or comment if you want to see another part. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.